Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have had to speak after several members in my 10+ years in the Parliament, but never before have I felt it being such a tall order to come on the heels of a presentation like this from the member for Grosile, my friend, Mr. Speaker, and a young man in whom I am exceptionally proud ever since he won his seat very handsomely in Grosile and took his rightful place in this chamber as the duly elected parliamentary rep. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of Olio, Despin, Gadet, Larissus, Lapel, Denier Riviere, Belmont, Grand Ravine, Richfond, and Grand Riviere, Mr. Speaker. And these communities, when they come together, they constitute the constituency known as Dennery North. And the residents of these communities, Mr. Speaker, have stood with me on this journey and in my quest to better lives in the said communities from 2011 up to today. And Mr. Speaker, on 3 different occasions, they have, on 3 different occasions, 3 different elections, lined up outside the various polling stations to repose their confidence in the majority in my ability to articulate their concerns and give expression, Mr. Speaker, to whatever it is they believe can impact them on a national level. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you from where I stand today, notwithstanding all the utterances from the other side, whenever the member for Castries East and Prime Minister decides to call the next election, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Dennery North, without fuss, with very little fanfare, from Baflora to the Badlil, the refrain will once again be unambiguous, Shawn again. Mr. Speaker, there's no better news that can come the way of the United Workers' Party supporters in Dennery North than to hear that Shawn Edward is retiring and is not contesting elections again. But Mr. Speaker, I have news for them. I am ready for the next election. I am ready to commence my 4th term in this honorable chamber. But I know the elections might not be on the horizon because we have so much more to fix and we have so much more to do for the people of St. Lucia. And so, Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of the people of Dennery North to wholeheartedly support the estimates as presented by the member for Castries East. Mr. Speaker, I remember on the eve of the last general election, 2021, I was the guest on a talk show, Chat and Chill, or Chill and Chat. And the question was put to me, why Philip J. Pierre for Prime Minister? And without hesitation, Mr. Speaker, and the tape is there for anybody to review, I responded, he's honest, he's experienced, he has steady hands, he has led some of the most important ministries and departments of government. And Mr. Speaker, in the current environment that confronted our country, he was the best option for St. Lucia and St. Lucians. And so, Mr. Speaker, in the past 2.5 years, the Prime Minister and member for Castries East has demonstrated that he is indeed the man for the job. Mr. Speaker, the estimates of revenue and expenditure and allocations to the various programs across agencies is yet another demonstration, Mr. Speaker, of the astute nature and the financial management acumen that the Prime Minister brings to the job of Prime Ministership. And Mr. Speaker, from a personal standpoint, I have been fortunate to have served under 2 Prime Ministers in my political career. And I remember when entering government for the first time in 2011, Mr. Speaker, I served under the member for Vieux-Fort South. And for me, Mr. Speaker, every Monday when I took my seat in the cabinet, sitting between the then MP for Soufrière, the Honorable Harold Dalso, and the senator responsible in the cabinet for physical development, the Honorable Stanley Felix, I used to remark to them very quietly, Mr. Speaker, that I was getting an education that people had to pay thousands of dollars to receive overseas that they referred to as tuition or university education. And so, Mr. Speaker, I learned a lot serving under the member for Vieux-Fort South. And today I am blessed and privileged to be serving with another Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, who has demonstrated that his demeanor and his posture is predicated on a genuine love and concern for the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, we have a budget of approximately $1.8 billion. And Mr. Speaker, when I look at the agencies under my ministerial watch, I am extremely satisfied and pleased with the figures that have been assigned to my various departments. Mr. Speaker, let us look at the Department of Sustainable Development. This year, or this financial year, the Department of Sustainable Development has been allocated a recurrent amount of $22,497,800 and a capital allocation of $3,344,700, giving us an agency total of $25,842,500. Mr. Speaker, a significant amount, as has always been the case for the financing of the Department of Sustainable Development, comes from friendly governments and international agencies such as UNEP, UNFCCC, JEF, etc. And under sustainable development, Mr. Speaker, the grants and contributions, there are two agencies in the remit of that department that receive grants from the government of St. Lucia, namely the PMA, or the Peat Management Area, which receive $300,000, and the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority, which gets, Mr. Speaker, an allocation or a grant of $10,629,416. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education receives a sizable chunk of the national budget. Mr. Speaker, for recurrent expenditure or the recurrent allocation for the Ministry of Education is a whopping $237 million, $230,500, and the capital allocation of $24,661,700, giving the Ministry of Education a total amount of $261,892,200. And this figure, Mr. Speaker, accounts for 13.8% of the national budget. And when you combine, Mr. Speaker, the $261 million for education with the $25 million for sustainable development, the agency, Ministry of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology, and Vocational Training receives 15% of the national budget. And so, Mr. Speaker, the adage is applicable. To whom much is given, much is expected. And so, Mr. Speaker, our government has predicated its programming on a very robust education agenda. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education has received $5,102,900 as an increase in the provision of services. Mr. Speaker, $370,000 for the expansion of the school bus subsidy program. We have also received $589,703 for teacher promotion upgrades and summary reinstatements for primary and secondary school teachers. $100,000, Mr. Speaker, for replacement of teachers on study leave with pay. And teachers can only be granted study leave with pay once the memos have been taken to the Cabinet, and the Cabinet of Ministers, after having examined the various circumstances presented by the Ministry of Education, Cabinet makes a determination as to whether somebody is deserving of study leave with pay or not. Mr. Speaker, we have in the budget this year an allocation of $65,679 for the appointment of a second vice principal for the Vieux-Fort Comprehensive Secondary School. Mr. Speaker, the enrollment at the Vieux-Fort Comprehensive Secondary School is sizable, and the performance of this school, Mr. Speaker, particularly in regional examinations, CAPE has been outstanding. And only 2 weeks ago, we witnessed once again the exploits of the students from the Vieux Comprehensive Secondary School on the tracks at the Island Champs. And so, Mr. Speaker, we believe that we have to strengthen administration and management at that school to enable them to achieve even more than what they have been achieving. Mr. Speaker, there's an allocation of $250,000 for strengthening mathematics instruction in schools because we have a serious problem as it relates to the performances of our students in mathematics exams, both at the local level and at the regional level. Mr. Speaker, we've been allocated $148,398 for the registration of new early childhood centers, one of which will be, Mr. Speaker, established in the Mabuya Valley or the Denry North constituency, if you prefer. Mr. Speaker, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party between 2011 and 2016, under the NICE program, saw the need to assign assistants to principals of primary schools to help them meet the daily administrative duties that they had to contend with, Mr. Speaker, whilst providing clinical supervision for the teachers at the various schools. This year, Mr. Speaker, we are going to reinstate the Principal Assistance Program. But we will resort to a phased approach where in the first instance, Mr. Speaker, with $392,259, we will be, Mr. Speaker, reinstating 21 of the principal's assistants, and we will decide which schools will be benefiting from the first tranche of monies received from the Ministry of Finance. We have 71 schools, Mr. Speaker, and we are only facilitating 21 in the first instance. The Prime Minister is whispering to me, Mr. Speaker, almost to suggest, and I do not want to misquote or misread him, that, yes, he said I can't read his lips, but he's saying that maybe before the financial year is over, he might be able to cover every one of the 71 schools. Mr. Speaker, $221,704 for additional guidance, counseling services, and psychosocial support. Mr. Speaker, our children are troubled. They are disturbed, and some are traumatized. And Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister in his wisdom has seen the need to give the Ministry of Education an additional $221,704 for additional guidance, counseling, services, and psychosocial support. Mr. Speaker, $518,040 increase for 2 years of contribution to the TVET Council. Mr. Speaker, we are extremely big on TVET, and a full statement on the TVET program in the Ministry of Education will be made during the debate, during the policy debate, which will be held next month. Mr. Speaker, $344,885 for the establishment of a National Accreditation Council, $341,000 for compensation or damages for situations on school compound, insurance, and things of that sort. Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, there is a little more than $500,000 for payment of arrears to the University of the West Indies Council of Law. And the situation was so bad, Mr. Speaker, having inherited a huge debt to the University of the West Indies, that the UE was saying to the government of St. Lucia, we are not prepared to receive your law students until such time you can sit with us and come to an agreement in terms of how the outstanding monies would have been addressed. Mr. Speaker, we also have in the budget this year $520,000 for an increase in provision for first-generation scholarship with Monroe College. And in the policy statement, Mr. Speaker, I will be saying more about the first-generation scholarship program with Monroe College. So, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education, as I said, has received an additional $5,102,000, Mr. Speaker, for the following services and programs that I just mentioned. Mr. Speaker, with grants and contributions under the Ministry of Education, we provide grants to approximately 42 entities, local and regional, notwithstanding that the responsibility to pay subventions and dues to regional institutions is in the remit of the Ministry of External Affairs. And so the Ministry of Education, we are working with the CXC, and we're also working with the Caribbean Accreditation Authority for Education in Medicine and other health professionals known as CAMHP. On the domestic front, Mr. Speaker, in relation to grants and contributions, Ministry of Education, the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College receives $18,290,164 from the government of St. Lucia. The National Skills Development Center, or NSDC, receives $2,887,291. And for facilities fees, Mr. Speaker, on the grants and contribution, the Ministry of Finance has made available to the Ministry of Education $2,358,500. And Mr. Speaker, I'm also happy to report to this honorable House that the St. Lucia Cadet Corps, and although you will find that line item, Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, the legislation is clear, and the Ministry of Education has been having meetings with the Cadet Corps, and I'm happy to report that the Prime Minister, in his wisdom, Mr. Speaker, has given the Cadet Corps an additional $26,200 for programming this year. Mr. Speaker, we also have $46 million to spend, Mr. Speaker, as per the estimates. Early childhood development and protection, $1.8 million. Major repairs, rehabilitation of schools, Mr. Speaker, $14,195. Mr. Speaker, the EQUIP, which is funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, Education Quality Improvement Project, $3.1 million. Construction of a block at CARE, $109,000. Rehabilitation of NSDC building, $357,000. The Human Capital Resilience Project funded by the World Bank, Mr. Speaker, in this year's estimates, you will notice there is a figure of $16,400,190. ICT integration, $2,117,551. TVET transformation project, $2.3 million. OECS Pearl, $1.3 million. And the PUT, Mr. Speaker, which is really PUT acronym for Program for Education, Realignment and Transformation, there is a sum of $900,000 to get the program going. And the PUT is really a continuation of several other programs that the Ministry of Education would have entered with the Caribbean Development Bank over the years. So we would have heard of the BIP program. We now have EQUIP, Mr. Speaker, and the EQUIP will be succeeded by the PUT. Enhancing school security, school security has been a challenge for the Ministry of Education. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance has allocated to the Ministry of Education $1.3 million to enhance school security. The OECS Skills and Innovation Project, $2.3 million. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are looking at a total of $46,644,700 for the programs that I just mentioned. Mr. Speaker, I will resist, in the interest of time, the temptation to speak in any elaborate way on some of the programs that I have mentioned. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is now time for me to turn my attention to the constituency of Dennery North in terms of how $1.8 million under the various heads, $1.8 billion, Mr. Speaker, I'm even more excited, and how that figure across agencies can impact the people of Dennery North. And so, Mr. Speaker, I immediately draw your attention to Head 43, Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport. Reconstruction and rehabilitation of roads, $2,001,000. Mr. Speaker, I expect our road issues in Dennery North to be addressed during this financial year. And Mr. Speaker, I have on many occasions before come to this chamber, and I have been able to lament the fact that for 5 years in opposition, Mr. Speaker, I was able to do absolutely nothing in my constituency because the Prime Minister at the time believed it was the right political strategy to employ to deny me, Mr. Speaker. And every time I speak about that, Mr. Speaker, I'm tempted to get emotional. That the people of Dennery North, Mr. Speaker, they had a right in this democracy to decide who they're voting for. They had elected me for the first time in 2011. And based on my performance, notwithstanding that on the national level they turned against the St. Lucia Labour Party, but in Denrinoff, Mr. Speaker, the people expressed their satisfaction with my level of representation, and they went into the various polling stations and they elected me as their representative. And when I came in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, to debate budget and I saw figures in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, I had a legitimate expectation that I would have been able to execute projects on behalf of the people of Denrinoff. Not roads, Mr. Speaker, not school repairs, not CDP. Absolutely nothing was given to me. And today, Mr. Speaker, I have a deficit. And notwithstanding the fact that the Prime Minister has been very kind to Denrinoff in this term of government, Mr. Speaker, I am just dealing with the deficit even before I can begin to venture in new areas. So with an allocation for road reconstruction and rehabilitation of roads of $2,001,000, Mr. Speaker, I expect a number of roads in Denrinoff to be addressed. But Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me to raise the expectations, rightly so, of my people without placing on the record my gratitude to the Prime Minister and the Minister for Infrastructure for the cemetery road which was rehabilitated roughly 2 or 3 months ago. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, the Austin Hill Road is under reconstruction, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are a few roads that we all have become familiar with in this chamber. The Austin Hill Road is one of them. The St. Mary Road is one of them, Mr. Speaker, and I don't know who knows where St. Mary Road is. I will leave that to the member for Miku North. The Laboratory Road, the Caten Road, and those are the roads, Mr. Speaker, we've heard about time and time again being spoken about right here in this chamber. And so today, as we speak, Mr. Speaker, the Austin Hill Road is being repaired thanks to the St. Lucia Labour Party. But there's a history with the Austin Hill Road. Austin Hill. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister was the Minister for Infrastructure, and we both were working in the cabinet of the member for Viewfort South, we did not have sufficient monies at the time to do the road in its entirety. So we decided that we were going to do the middle portion of the road where it was a bit steep and vehicles were having difficulty navigating that portion of the road. Banana farmers who were cultivating up in Madigua and shop owners in Upper Austin Hill were having tremendous difficulty, Mr. Speaker, getting their goods and their supplies up that road. And so, with the little that was available, we did the middle portion of the road. The government changed, and so I had a natural expectation that the road had started and that the United Workers' Party government would have completed the road. Mr. Speaker, in applying the Belarus doctrine, it was clear what they wanted to do. They wanted to leave the road in the state that they found it, hoping that the people of Denrinoff would have turned against me and that their candidate would have found favor with the electorate in that constituency and they would have gone on to win the election. Mr. Speaker, the era of the country bookie is no more. Our people are more enlightened today, and they know that once the St. Lucia Labour Party is in government, Mr. Speaker, their road would have been fixed. And true to form, midway in this term of government, the Austin Hill Road is being repaired. So today, Mr. Speaker, Aiden and his family, they are happy people. Jupi is a happy man today. T-Pop is happy today. Brother George, Bebe, Zatola, and even Matida, Mr. Speaker. Matida is happy because you know what? Matida, for the first time in a long time, will get a ride, and she's in her 80s, will get a ride on a road that is properly paved. And she will no longer suffer, Mr. Speaker, having to traverse a bad road because a wicked government decided that she too had to be punished because in the majority, they went to the polls to vote for Shawn Edward and the St. Lucia Labour Party. But we're not just stopping, Mr. Speaker. We're not just stopping, Mr. Speaker, on the main Austin Hill Road. But in Upper Austin Hill, you have a little enclave that we call Two Marys. And only Sunday, Mr. Speaker, we were there putting the base material, hoping that, Mr. Speaker, when the CDP allocation for the next quarter is unveiled, we will be able to put a concrete surface because that section was not part of the Ministry of Infrastructure project. So, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased with that allocation. The Alemon Road in Grand Riviere. I have had 3 attempts since I came into government or into politics trying to complete this road. Again, under the member for Vieux Fort South when he was Prime Minister, and I received my allocation, I was able to do phase 1 of the Alemon Road in Grand Riviere Dennery. Mr. Speaker, during that same term, I attempted phase 2. And true to form, the United Workers' Party came into office, and that was the end of the Alemon Road. We have been in government for 2.5 years, and we have attempted, Mr. Speaker, to, not just attempted, but we have completed phase 3. With 1 phase left, the Prime Minister has assured me, Mr. Speaker, that in this financial year, he will do everything possible. And I see the member for Ancillary Canneries looking at me as if to suggest, subject to the availability of funds, that this particular road will be completed. But, Mr. Speaker, we're not just waiting for the Ministry of Infrastructure to make that intervention. Because today, as we speak, there are 3 contractors doing drainage works on that road being funded by the Constituency Development Program. So by the time the Ministry of Infrastructure is ready to move in, we would have taken care of the drainage, and all they have to do for us is to give us a surface to finish that road where Alemon connects to Ice Barber Shop in Montparnasse, Grand Riviere. Mr. Speaker, Lower Olean Combined School, still under head 43, Infrastructure, Line Item Reconstruction and Rehabilitation of Roads. Mr. Speaker, Lower Olean Combined School, that road has been in a deplorable state for some time. And I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, the calls come ever so often from Mrs. Marcella Hobson, who happens to be a resident. And recently I had to tell her, Marcella, I was not given anything for 5 years, so you have to bear with me. But, Mr. Speaker, you know what we've done just to provide immediate relief? We have been able to mobilize with the Ministry of Infrastructure to get the grader that is currently in Canals. As soon as the grader is finished in Canals, it will be up in Olean, next to the school, to provide immediate relief. And thereafter, we will look, Mr. Speaker, to pave the road Lower Olean Combined School. So that Mrs. Hobson will be a happy lady. Yvonne, who lives in that area, will be a happy lady. And Althea, Mr. Speaker, Obi's mom, who's originally from Grand Riviere, she too will have a good road to traverse, and they would, Mr. Speaker, once and for all, say goodbye to the deplorable conditions that they've had to put up with. Mr. Speaker, je voulais dire that je suis très content pour un budget l'année ça là. L'année $2 millions, et ça va tout l'argent nous a dépensé le chemin. Mais ça, l'argent ça a dit nous, gouvernement a un programme que a un chemin. Et je vais faire point en plus bonnet. Comme Mr. Speaker, là je tapé électé par Jordan Renouf. Je suis ni en la fois que je fait chemin en constituency, même si en élection 2016, le parti perd l'élection. Mais moi, j'ai une élection en 2009. Et je suis croire que là, je venu ici comme un parlement et le gouvernement qui a mis l'argent pour faire projet, je suis ni en droit pour joindre tout le monde. Et pièce monde qui bon en cerveau, qui a bien, Mr. Speaker, c'est comme ça ici posé. Mais même parlement pour Microsoft, là, c'était Premier ministre. Il prend en position pièce l'autre Premier ministre, c'est ici, jamais point. Depuis où c'est en même opposition, même si vous avez un citoyen élection, il va y avoir une pièce qualité assistance, par chimie, par Epi Health Center, par l'école, rien, que ça fait un projet en community. Et que ça pour qu'ils aient fait ça, Mr. Speaker? Parce qu'il y a pas c'est mon qui est constitué qui a tourné contre tout, et que l'élection, il y a vote bali et puis candidat. Mr. Speaker, on ne pas couillon encore. Jordan Renouf savent, les partis en gouvernement, et puis Shawn Edward au Parlement, il y a joué plus bagaille, puis ça jamais joué en bas gouvernement flambeau. And that is why I am happy. So aujourd'hui, quand nous parlons, Mr. Speaker, chimé en les mondes Austin qui a fait, et que vous depuis Madigua, il y a mené ça pour arriver jusqu'au métro. Et que me dit plus bonnet, nous avons déjà fait un choix. Là, nous sommes en gouvernement entre l'année 2011 et puis 2016. Mr. Speaker, en les mondes Grand Rivière, moi dis chimé ça a été fait l'année ça, que nous avons pris les mondes et nous avons mené Montparnasse, Bob Barber Shop Ice. Nous avons aussi fait chimé pour l'école d'Espin. And Mr. Speaker, the stretch of road at Larry Soos that most persons refer to as the Mambers stretch. This long stretch of road off the Richmond Highway, which takes you into Larissus, flanked by bananas on either side. Mr. Speaker, this is the most patched road in St. Lucia. I can no longer accept patches. Don't talk about VG Road here. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and I have had a discussion about this road. I have spoken to the Minister for Infrastructure about this road. And the plan is we are going to widen this particular stretch of road by 1 meter in the direction of the mango trees that served at one time as a windbreak for the bananas that were cultivated in that valley. Drains will be concreted from the car wash all the way to the Lapel intersection, Mr. Speaker. And I'm hoping that at the end of it, we will get a brand new Barber Green surface, Barber Green as thick as what is on the Venus Road in the ancillary Cadbury's constituency. Mr. Speaker, the Richmond Ring Road, Anselma, Levi, Johnson, Lynette, Pastor Alfred, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am inundated with phone calls and requests. Mr. Speaker, the road has been in a deplorable condition for a long time. And this is one of the roads I was hoping I would have been able to do, Mr. Speaker, between 2016 and 2021. But as I have indicated before, I was given absolutely no assistance. And so, Mr. Speaker, that road is still in a deplorable state. Mr. Speaker, let me draw your attention, and there's so many other roads, Barflora Road, Twafway Road, and a number of roads, which I will probably revisit when I speak to the allocation on the constituency development program. Mr. Speaker, Head 41, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security, and Rural Development. A budget la l'année ça là, nous elle année en line item yo ka créé banana management unit. Et unit ça a joindre à peu près $1 million pour garder pour en affaires administration FIG. Mr. Speaker, ces femmes ja répondent nous, les nous dit aller planter plus FIG. Mais dans cette situation nous ni et FIG right now, la pani win fresh encore. Et nous tous savent qui ça qui arrive win fresh et que qui moun win fresh disparaît. Gouvernement qui était là, gouvernement Flambeau, and a cause win fresh pour us disparaître qu'au formaté pour manager les affaires yo par koyo. Mr. Speaker, I know that my farmers still continue to toil on their banana fields. And every single opportunity that Laura gets, and Paulie gets, and the other farmers get, Mr. Speaker, they continue to explain to me some of the challenges that they are having as it relates to marketing. But I'm extremely confident, Mr. Speaker, that given some of the measures that will be disclosed in the policy debate, that our banana farmers will begin to see light in their business, Mr. Speaker, once again. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information, Head 46. The line item, Community Tourism, an allocation of $3.3 million. Mr. Speaker, this is welcome news for the people of Dennery North. We in the Dennery Basin, Mr. Speaker, are beginning to benefit directly from the tourism pie. And only recently, Mr. Speaker, I had discussions with 2 young constituents who expressed interest in setting up an ATV tour in the Mabuya Valley. And today, Mr. Speaker, without putting out their business or giving them a free advertising plug, I can tell you that they are at a very advanced stage, working very closely with the Ministry of Tourism. So, Brendan, most persons know as Ampa, and Elias Ford, Mr. Speaker, are 2 of the individuals who would have expressed interest. But there's so much more that we can get from community tourism, but in the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, I will confine my comments and contribution to Head 46 to the fact that I'm extremely pleased that young persons from the Mabuya Valley are benefiting directly from that particular tourism allocation. Mr. Speaker, Head 47, Department of Physical Development and Urban Renewal. Land Administration, $7.5 million. Mr. Speaker, Land Administration, and I should also tie that with line item, Mr. Speaker, Proud, for which $3 million has been allocated. Mr. Speaker, Olio is one of the most affected communities in this entire country, as it relates to land rationalization and land administration. Olio has some of the most expensive houses on the east coast of St. Lucia. But the people do not have title to the land. And homes constructed to the tune of $500,000, Mr. Speaker, cannot be used as collateral. They can't go to the bank, Mr. Speaker, to borrow to send their children to school. And I have a particular constituent who has been at me, and justifiably so, Mr. Wilfred Wells, whom most persons know as Manton. He has a very impressive structure, Mr. Speaker, probably costing or worth more than $1 million, but he does not have title to the land. And the sooner, Mr. Speaker, the sooner we can rationalize the land situation in Olio to give people title, the better. Mr. Speaker, during this financial year, I intend on working very closely with personnel from the Department of Physical Development and Urban Renewal, and more specifically, Mr. Speaker, personnel from PROUD that will be statutarized to ensure that the people of Olio get the relief that they so richly deserve. Mr. Speaker, let us turn our attention to Head 21, Office of the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely pleased to see the distress fund as a line item, $1.6 million. I remember during my first term in government, Mr. Speaker, there's a gentleman in Belmont, or who lives in Belmont, by the name of Shat, William O'Culey. It was a Saturday morning when Shat, a name that has evoked a smile from the member for Beaufort North, Shat left his home in Belmont and he went to the garden. He left 3 or 4 of his grandchildren at home, Mr. Speaker. And at about 11 o'clock, he got a phone call that his house was on fire. By the time he made it from the garden in Upper Dannervia to Belmont, the house was completely destroyed. And Mr. Speaker, when I approached him, he was inconsolable. And it's not often that you see a big man from Dennery North crying, Mr. Speaker. But there are some parts of this country where you see them crying on demand. But Shad had a legitimate reason to be crying on that Saturday morning. I approached the then Prime Minister, knowing that there was a distress fund. And all he said to me, Mr. Speaker, was that I needed to come with a fire report to justify that there was a fire and an assessment from the fire department. And in very quick time, a check of $20,000 was issued, Mr. Speaker, to Shat, and shortly thereafter, he was able to be back under a roof with his grandchildren, thanks to the work of the St. Lucia Labour Party. But what happened when the government changed? As a line item in the budget, the distress fund disappeared. Mr. Speaker, kí ba disa akuyo? L'année bay, moi un budget là yo créé distress fund. Ek distress fund, ek sou comprendre ki sa mot parole distress yé, ça y moun qui en trois cas et qui en difficulté. Ek trois cassement et be difficulté ça venir n'importe manière. Il ça accident, il ça défait. Ek premier ministre temps passé, membre parlement pour vieux fort, il te mettait un budget là nous te gouvernement dernier coup ça créé distress fund. Et quand normal constituency moi chat Kaoté Belmont, tout le monde connaît lui. Kali tapé brûlé. Et depuis nous te joindre papier, hors département d'y fait pour dire oui la tenir d'y fait et puis combien bagaille nom la perd. Nous te joindre un check bali et qui ça bâti Kali encore. And throughout the length and breadth of this country, Mr. Speaker, listen to the news, Mr. Speaker. There is always a little situation where somebody's little structure has gone up in flames. Sometimes they're at work at the hotel. Sometimes they're in church. Sometimes they're down the road. And in quick time, Mr. Speaker, the plywood or the board, the mahogany, would go up in flames. And these people have no insurance, Mr. Speaker. What do you say to them? What did the former administration do? Mr. Speaker, they said we were encouraging a culture of mendicants by programming for these people. So today, when I see the distress fund being reinstated in the manner that the Prime Minister and member for Castries East has reintroduced it, Mr. Speaker, I feel that I am an empowered parliamentary rep. Because Kerry Abbott from Denyer Riviera, better known as Ribena, He had a house. Yes, we have some very expensive names in Denry North. And not only do we have names, we can christen people too, so you have to be careful. And his house, Mr. Speaker, was destroyed by fire. Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, a check belonging to the Accountant General has been written so that Ribena Kerry Abbott can be compensated. And early next week, Mr. Speaker, he will receive his check for an amount that I don't wish to disclose right now. I hope he doesn't use it to drink Ribena. But that is what we are about, Mr. Speaker. A government that can create an enabling environment for billionaires to come in and invest. And Mr. Speaker, by the same token, we can meet every solution at their level, understanding that they have a role in the society. Mr. Speaker, not only fire, Eva Joseph of Denier Riviere, she migrated to the Virgin Islands to work in the hospitality industry. And she just kept on saving her money, saving her money, saving her money. Mr. Speaker, she was able to build a house in Denier Riviere. Lo and behold, it was close to the riverbank. And Mr. Speaker, we had a landslide that has threatened to compromise the young lady's structure. The Ministry of Infrastructure has made the assessment, but it is taking a while for that to be addressed. It is my intention, Mr. Speaker, as early as Tuesday of next week, given that Monday is a holiday, for me to write to the Prime Minister to see what form of compensation she can get or support she can get under the distress fund. And I believe it is a legitimate request, Mr. Speaker, having examined Mr. Speaker, I noticed the member for Miku North is beginning to chuckle. I have not requested a jetty, and I don't know what he's nervous about. But, Mr. Speaker, I will formally write to the Prime Minister to see if she can be assisted under the distress fund. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the most exciting of all the heads of expenditure in this year's estimates for the people of Denry North, the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and Elderly Affairs. And there is a line item, Mr. Speaker, Larissus Health Center Reconstruction Project. Right. And as I peruse the estimates, the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance, working with the Minister for Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, are saying that it will cost the government of St. Lucia $1.1 million to completely reinstate the Larissus Health Center. Mr. Speaker, today, the 27th of March 2024, and according to your watch, at 12 minutes to 4 o'clock, there are workmen at the Larissus Health Center reinstating the Larissus Health Center. But there's a story to be told about the Larissus Health Center.
They work half day today.
Mr. Speaker, no, they're not working half day today. They're working the entire day. That's right. The Larissus Health Center was destroyed by fire, Mr. Speaker, or damaged by fire in 2014. The St. Lucia Labour Party was in government. Mr. Speaker, I approached the then Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. And in the estimates of 2015, Mr. Speaker, there was a line item in the budget for the reinstatement of the Larissus Health Center. But because the elections came and the St. Lucia Labour Party had to leave office, Mr. Speaker, the member for Mikud South, he took the allocation out of the budget. Completely, he didn't say, well, okay, we will look at it the following year. For 5 years, like in Creole, Gavin, but all right. For 5 years, Mr. Speaker, he did not see the need, after he had taken it out in the first year, to reinstate the amount for the Larissus Health Center. Mr. Speaker, today, the Larissus Health Center is being reconstructed. But I will say more about the Larissus Health Center in terms of the services that will be provided. Les diffé détruit Health Center Larissus. Gouvernement Labour, tire power. Ministre qui donne une responsabilité pour finance et que c'était Premier ministre, même Parlement pour fort. Il mettait l'argent en dit dans le budget là pour nous bâtir Health Center à Ville, parce que ça c'est un Health Center qui a bail service pour moun au Lyon, Despines, Gadette, Larissus, l'appel de Rivière Belmont. Et puis Jaguar vient qui vient là tout. Mais vous savez qui ça qui fait, Mr. Speaker? Puis le parti va gagner l'élection. Le Premier ministre là venu, Premier ministre qui dit le side leader flambeau, il tire l'argent budget là, à conduit pour dire, je donne une offre, pas besoin de ça. because jou election, you allez et you voté by St. Lucia Labour Party. But Mr. Speaker, I hope those of us who are aspiring to continue in the politics and to contest elections are learning from that. Mr. Speaker, there is only one form of compensation for political wickedness. You will lose. You will lose. And those who are following bad company, Mr. Speaker, and I will come to that in a while, because there's one on the other side who can't seem to understand that she did not win the seat in Denry North. And I have no difficulty with she referring to Denry North, with her referring to Denry North as her constituency, you know, Mr. Speaker. That is the place of her birth. But in terms of who has legitimacy to come and stand in this chamber and speak on behalf of the people, Mr. Speaker, that is my responsibility. That's right. I did not give it to myself. It was the people of Denry North in the majority who have on 3 occasions decided that they want me to come and speak on their behalf. Right. So when you see aspiring politicians following bad company, and they've been given a political lifeline by putting them in the Senate, and they cannot tell the people of Denry North what it is that they can do for them, and instead they want to engage in conversations about ministers' account, Mr. Speaker, we will account for their time before my 60 minutes or my time on my feet is up. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, work is ongoing. We will, as I've been told by the Minister for Health and his team, see a full reinstatement of the Larry Seuss Health Center in this calendar year 2024 with additional services, dental services. So, c'est pas qu'on entend si un moun à Denry North ou en Valley à tenir mal dedans, on y pour prendre un ride pour aller à Gap là, on y pour prendre un bus à les highway, et que les meilleurs à terre les highway, on peut marcher à l'hôpital Denry pour y ça garder down bas. We are having dental services at the Larry Seuss Health Center. And there's so many other services, but we will talk about those at some other time. So no longer will I see elderly people from Garrett and Olio and Despin standing by the highway in the hot sun waiting for a shuttle. Mr. Speaker, the catchment area for the Larry Seuss Health Center is such that the people can move from their homes to the facility without much hassle. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention, or your attention, to Head 48, Ministry of Housing and Local Government. The National Housing Assistance Program, $2.1 million. Mr. Speaker, I will not tell this honorable chamber how many houses we built, how many we have repaired. Experience has taught me that much. What I will say instead, Mr. Speaker, is that...
Yes, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I will say is that we have assisted a number of families. And Mr. Speaker, you have to see on social media, as I've attempted to communicate to the national population, the deplorable condition in which people live in this country. And when I reflect, Mr. Speaker, that not too long ago in this country, people were living in such squalid and deplorable conditions. And in a country like this, you had $112 million being spent on horses? On horses? How can that be right, Mr. Speaker? Where is the conscience that goes with that? But, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work in the interests of our people. And very recently, Mr. Speaker, a name that has resonated in this chamber before, Joseph Kelly, better known as Vaz. He, Mr. Speaker, lived in conditions that were not the best. And we took a decision at the level of the Constituency Council and as parliamentary rep, and we decided that we were making an intervention in his life. And today, Mr. Speaker, I may not have had as many constructed as my friend from Denry South. And my comments about those, I rather leave for the cabinet room. But what I can tell you is that in Joseph Kelly's house, Mr. Speaker, we have shown the rest of the constituency and by extension, some St. Lucians, what our government is about. That is how you empower people, Mr. Speaker. That is how you exhibit and you express care. That is how you show compassion to people. And again, Mr. Speaker, this is what we mean when we say we are putting people first. So, quand il va là a bien fait, à Kainef, il y a bien petit oui, avec vase là au cabasé, Mr. Speaker, l'après-midi, il y a un balcon, Cabretti justly because he comprend that l'année gouvernement. Ça c'est un homme, ou ça c'est qu'a fait pour l'État, Mr. Speaker, en foncier, il a tiré moun la yo mort. Et les flambeaux en tout un gouvernement. And I don't know how people attempt to defend that. When they came into government, they fire a burial assistant. But a lot of those who were advocating to bury him, he buried some of them, literally. That's what we're about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the number of families and people who have gotten assistance from the office of the parliamentary rep in Denry North, profile them, Mr. Speaker, you will see an almost equal number of United Workers' Party supporters as Labour Party supporters. Look at the children from Denry North who are going to university on scholarships, Mr. Speaker. United Workers' Party families are benefiting because we understand that education is not something you should use in any discriminatory way. So that when I empower a child who's from a United Workers' Party household, Mr. Speaker, I am empowering somebody who will one day rise to a leadership position to make the Valley and by extension St. Lucia a better place. But no, Mr. Speaker, on the other side, it is always a politics of cutthroat. Mr. Speaker, Department of Youth, Economy and Economic Development, CDP, $22 million. Mr. Speaker, I sat here. Quel est mon discours? Mon cas assise en chaise là, comment me fort qu'à assise pour le moment. La montée en opposition. Et puis, c'est moi assise là pour 5 l'année. Et tous les années, oui, n'a dit encore, because you can hand, surtout as. Mr. Speaker, pour 5 l'année, moi assise là. Et que je regarde car séparé projet, qui venu boss, qui fait présentation en les PowerPoint pour dire qui ça yo joindre, qui ça yo fait et puis l'argent. Et tous les années, je crois que l'année ça yo pas bon because l'élection doit se passer l'année prochaine nous joindre. Dès moi venir l'année prochaine, moi plus décomporté. 3e année, rien. 4e année, moi dit peut-être yo savez l'élection quand venir yo ka chercher mouche moun, yo ni compassion, yo ka bon anti bail. Il vient plus mauvais, c'est à chambre pas bon. 5 l'année pas bon. Et quoi attend moi dit, là moi quitter Denry North pour venir au parlement. Moi ka passer à peu près 85 hardware. Et now moun ka passer avec ciment, Mr. Speaker. Pas yon sac ciment, moi les acheté. Pas yon shitty 111 ply, treated or untreated, moi les acheté. Because they will not give me. And we laugh. That's not a joke. The people of Denry North should not have been made to suffer because they voted for me. That is their right. And people come here, Mr. Speaker, and posture and make it seem as if they have all the solutions and the ideas. And those who have to denounce it, who claim they not like their leader, let their voice be heard, Mr. Speaker, in denouncing that wrong. But I'm happy when I know that this Prime Minister from Castries East ensures that there is equity in the distribution of state resources. So that the people of Monsieur in Choiseul, the people of Diga and Lacouville in Micoud South, they can have legitimate expectations that their rep will deliver for them because we are the government in office today, as was the case when the St. Lucia Labour Party was in government between 2011 and 2016. Mr. Speaker, the department, the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, Head 54. Mr. Speaker, we have said time and again that we are committed to upgrading.
You have 10 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to upgrading sporting infrastructure in this country. And recently, Mr. Speaker, as a government, we guaranteed a loan to the for the National Lotteries Authority to embark on sporting infrastructure upgrade. And naturally, Mr. Speaker, whatever is debated in the lower house is also usually debated in the lower house. And I could not help, Mr. Speaker, but follow the debate in the upper house, where the loan guarantee for the National Lotteries Authority was being discussed. And a political misfit, Mr. Speaker, decided to join the debate. Consistent with her utterances in the Parliament and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker, you should have heard the diatribe. You should have heard, Mr. Speaker, the classlessness that came out of the presentation. No substance. And at a time when you're supposed to come and tell people how much of an alternative you can be to Shawn Edward, you want to talk about minister's account because you're a puppet And people who went down that same road, they suffered the consequences. But you have become a mouthpiece, Mr. Speaker, where you're not even in charge of your own political faculties, but you're going to come here and talk. And she has no shame, because she wants to come and present documents to the Parliament to make it seem, Mr. Speaker, as if I had done something untoward and I was a crook. But let me tell you what happened. When I went into the Ministry of Education, during the first week, I asked the senior personnel, PS and DPS, to give me a status report on work currently happening in schools. And we went into the field, and I have my report. So I went to the Richford Combined School. Let me see who the contractors are. And there's a column for comments, contractors recommended by FERA. So I asked, who's FERA? Yes. I am the parliamentary rep, but FERA is, and Mr. Speaker, this is not something I'm making up, you know. Yes, I know you would have. Contractors recommended by FERA. You've never won an election. You're never a minister, but you're recommending contractors on behalf of the Ministry of Education. Mr. Speaker, Valton Building Supplies Limited, after we came into government, I went into the CDP office, and they're giving me a long list of materials procured, Denry of Constituency Development CDP account. And I've told you before, I never saw a dollar of CDP. But here was the individual who wants to paint me as what I'm not. Where did she get the authority? Where did she get the authority? But that's what you do. When your own candidacy is under threat. And there's nothing more disconcerting than when people can eyeball you and tell you they no longer want you. They're not voting for you. You have no political relevance. You're Pavlov. And you believe the best thing to do is to try and take me on. Gone onto a platform in MAC and wanted to associate the death of an elderly man to our election victory. And Mr. Speaker, I just, as I would have done in my cricket days, I picked up the line and I allowed that to go by into the keeper's gloves. But that should never be interpreted to mean that I'm weak or I cannot respond. I know my brand. The people of Denmark know me. And if you want to engage in constructive debate with me about taking the valley forward, if you want to challenge the fact that we have never had more young people from Denmark attending university and grabbing higher educational opportunities than today, let us have a conversation. But you want to talk about man's death? You want to come and enter conversation about minister's account? Mr. Speaker, I know who I am, you know. The people of Denmark know who I am. And I have said time and again, all you have to do, after a Bajan lawyer was paid more than $250,000 to investigate me, Mr. Speaker, the day they can come and show $1 that cannot be accounted for, and $1 that was not spent in conformity with the National Lotteries Authority Act, which states it must be spent on youth development and sports. Come and get me. You know what we did? I was tired seeing children putting their nails in the dirt at track meets, Mr. Speaker, and we've bought track shoes for them. Yes. Makiba Al-Sid cannot be vying for qualification at the Rio Olympics. Yes, and while she's in America, Mr. Speaker, yes, the landlord is chasing her for rent money. How can she focus? I caused the lotteries to pay the rent for her. And when Julian left Hess and went to St. Catherine High in Jamaica, yes, we caused it to happen. And when Laverne Spencer in Helsinki, Norway, doesn't have the support personnel that Shanti Lowe and the other Americans had, we caused it to happen. Right. And for that, I'm supposed to feel sorry? You proud, my brother. I'm supposed to tell them, challenge me on the work that I've done. But you know what it is? That's their style. Go after my character. They can never debate me on performance as a politician, as a rep, or as a minister. Never. They cannot do it. But they go.
You have 5 minutes left.
How many? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So when people who have no political relevance, I know what is sad about it, when this has been done, Mr. Speaker, the women of this country have come from too far. There are too many women in leadership position. That forward march by the women of our country is too real, too potent, and too profound to have despots like that coming and trying to bring on the average. Go in your section and get out of it. This is not for you. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, but there will be time to deal with that. And let me say here today, do not interpret my silence or me not wanting to respond to certain things as being weak. I'm not weak. I am proud of the work I did in the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. I am proud. So don't come with minister's account foolishness. Mr. Speaker, coincidentally, we will be hosting the GNPA netball competition in a couple of days. Mr. Speaker, when I was the Minister for Youth Development and Sports, we hosted GNPA. And I still have the letter. Who signed the letter to Lotteries Authority to pave the VG Sports Complex? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. And tell them, any day they can come with a check with my signature from National Lotteries, I'm going to resign the following day. Anytime they can come with one contract issued by the Lotteries Authority where my signature is on it, I'm going to leave the following day. Foolishness. They have nothing to talk about. Devoid of substance. Politically lost. And the easy thing to do is let's target this one and target this one. Don't come for me. Don't come for me. I can take them on, Mr. Speaker. But you know what? I have to keep my cool. My work in Denrinoff is not done yet. I have a lot to do for this country and for Denrinoff. I have 26,000 school children interested in my care. And every day I wake up, Mr. Speaker, I ask myself, will this action of yours, what reaction will it trigger from the children of this country? Mr. Speaker, I support the estimates as presented by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, ours is a working government. Mr. Speaker, ours is a government that puts people first. And let me say in this chamber that it is incumbent on us to protect the victory. There's nothing they hate more than hearing us say we're protecting the victory. We have to protect the victory. We are protecting the victory to ensure that they will not pull the laptop program from our children. We are protecting the victory because we do not want monies to be spent on horses while hospitals are being neglected. We are protecting the victory because people will not be paying for ambulance fees anymore. That is why we're protecting the victory. So when they come, Mr. Speaker, no ideas, same old day couché, and coming with all kind of tricks, hollow tricks. Go and play with dogs. Tick. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Denrinoff, I support the estimates. Yes, sir. I rest my case.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, Captain.